Always correct. Is this thing installed correctly? I asked. Are you sure it will cover everything? Yes, Helen. Paul tried to reassure me, smiling both sympathetically and impatiently. Well, who could blame him for that? We set up the video camera so that it could capture every moment of what was about to happen between us. I was about to pay an unexpected but well-deserved price for the activity Paul had brought to my attention. I met my husband George at the company where we both worked. I was a computer technician and he was a salesman. The first time we met was when he brought in his laptop to be fixed. He had such a sad look on his face as he described what had happened that I almost laughed. By the time he finished telling me what the problem was, I had already fixed it. He ran out of the office, cradling his laptop like it was his baby. I laughed, shook my head, and promptly forgot about him. 2 days later, he called me. Hello, Helen, it's George. Who? George Thomas. When I remained silent, he added, I brought my laptop the other day. You quickly solved my problem while I was still trying to explain to you what it was. Ah, yes, now I remember. You didn't give me your name. I know, and I quickly left you without doing the most important thing. I didn't say thank you. All I can offer in my defense is that I had 2 weeks of orders on that laptop, and I needed to finish them. Although I know that hardly excuses my bad manners. I was just overwhelmed. Most of the people who brought me their equipment kept grumbling as if it was my fault. Is this going to take a long time? Or, what do you mean you have to order parts? And, is there anyone here who knows what the hell is going on? That's what I'm used to. Not, thank you. Wow, well, you're welcome. He hesitated and cleared his throat twice before muttering, Ellen, I was wondering if you'd let me, make it up to you? I'd love to go with you, George. Okay, I know that sounds like some cocky broad, but it's really not. I was just afraid that if I waited for him to finish, I'd be too old to get dressed without the help of a nurse. Besides, as immersed as I was in my work, my last date had been 6 months ago, and to qualify it as a disaster meant actually reporting it as better than it actually was. A hesitation was heard in the receiver again, just enough to make me think, brilliant, Helen. That was not at all what he was trying to say. Practicing making a fool of yourself for the most part? Fortunately for my ego, the silence was broken by a warm laugh. Great! How about Friday night? We'll have dinner somewhere nice, but not too fancy, and then we'll see what happens. I gave him my address. I'll be ready at 7 o'clock. Friday night, I was looking at myself in the mirror for the 100th time when the doorbell rang. I was wearing a good old black dress just above my knees, complete with low heels and tights. I didn't actually like wearing dresses very much, and I certainly didn't like heels. The boots I wore in my 20s before entering engineering college and sneakers were my favorite shoes. Not that I'm butch, but you get the idea. I just prefer comfort. George looked very handsome leading me out. We went to a nice restaurant downtown and had a nice meal. After that, we went for a walk along the little stores and boutiques of the historic downtown area, just window shopping. We seemed to have a hard time finding common ground. We talked mostly about work, not getting too deep into personal problems. I really don't know why. I felt like there was some subtle connection between us, but for some reason neither of us could grab onto that thread and get closer. Eventually, we decided that we had enough for the day. On the way home, George's car slowed for a moment as we passed the local sports complex. I looked up and followed his gaze. He was looking at a sign announcing that tomorrow afternoon was the first game of the local Class A minor league baseball team. Being a gentleman, George walked me to the front door. There was an awkward silence. Then George said goodnight to me and walked down the driveway. "George, wait!" I shouted after him. He stopped and turned around. I swallowed and walked over to him. "It didn't go well today, George, and I don't know why. Let's try it again. Instead of getting dressed up and going to a restaurant, how about jeans, hot dogs, and a ball game tomorrow?" He grinned and his face brightened. "First pitch is at 3:15. Pick you up at 2 so we can watch batting practice? You got a deal." I kissed him and rushed to the door, the smile on my face as wide as his. The morning dragged on slowly. In the afternoon, well, I was starting to fall in love from the beginning. We had the promised hot dogs slathered in mustard with ketchup and gravy. We had beer in overflowing, foamy wet paper cups, cheese fries and popcorn. Every bit of it all went straight to my thighs and buttocks, and I enjoyed it all. George had to dress up to look the way a traveling salesman should look, but here he turned into a guy in jeans and a sports shirt. We exchanged life stories and were struck by the similarities between our fate in high school, the 3 years between there and college, and what we thought was important in life. We did a lot of yelling and bouncing. Our seats were right at first base, and the game was so-so until the 9th inning, when the home team turned the score around and won. Rejoicing, we jumped into each other's arms. After that hug, our first kiss began. We didn't interrupt it until the cries of, "Get a room!" became exceptionally loud. The drive to my house flew by. We kissed all the way up the driveway. Through the door, George managed to slam behind us, and all the way down the hallway to my bedroom. Our trail was littered with shoes, jeans, and shirts. George managed to get my bra on the fan, and we fell onto the bed. My hand was inside his boxers. 2 months later, we moved in together. 6 months later, we got married. On our honeymoon, we visited South and North Carolina, spending time there and enjoying the places we'd unknowingly shared in our college days. When we returned, we found an apartment to make it ours and settled into a happy domestic routine at work and at home. The only spoonful of tar in the honey barrel was the business trips that were mandatory for George. But he made excellent money and enjoyed it as much as I did my job. We were both naturally thrifty, so we were able to put away a decent amount each month. Soon we would be able to afford a down payment on a house, and we discussed the exciting possibility that I could eventually quit my job and have a baby with us. With George's more outgoing nature, I became more involved in the company's social activities. I played softball on a mixed team sponsored by the company. Unfortunately, George missed a lot of games due to his responsibilities, but he always came when he was home to cheer me on as the sexiest defender at first base I've ever seen. The director of corporate relations as well as the pitcher on the softball team was Paul Weinkamp. A tall, well-built bachelor, he was the object of intense scrutiny from single women, and even one, I was sure, who was married. Who he was dating didn't concern or interest me. One day, he collapsed on the bench after a well-played game. He pulled 2 bottles of water out of the refrigerator and offered me one. I gratefully accepted. "Where's George?" "I think he's in St. Louis today." Paul shook his head. "George is a real do-gooder, but I bet you wouldn't want him spending so much time traveling. If you were my wife, I wouldn't let you out of my sight. Well, I know what it's like out there. My ex-wife used to work in sales and disappear all the time. Then I found out she wasn't spending those nights on the road alone." He sighed heavily. "You never expect it to happen to you," he said as he stood up and walked toward the parking lot. Well, it was unexpected. I hadn't allowed for the idea that George might not be 100% faithful. However, Paul's ex-wife surprised me. After all, he was a pretty good-looking man, and I was sure made an excellent salary. Why would anyone cheat on such a dainty prey? As the weeks went by, I began to feel that I was seeing more and more of Paul. He would drop by my office from time to time, and on several occasions I was specifically asked to install upgrades to the computers in corporate relations. And of course, we saw each other at every match. He never missed an opportunity to ask about George, and there was always a certain suspicion in his words. Although, given his own history, I could understand his thoughts, and no doubt George was behaving decently. More than once I began to speculate about it, but Paul always seemed to feel the same way I felt, and would change the subject of conversation, usually shifting it to me. He often complimented me on my ball skills, as well as my extreme attractiveness. With assurances that he meant no offense, he made several light but flattering allusions to my looks. More than once I returned home to look at myself in the mirror. Obviously, he saw something I didn't. I even liked Paul's attention. We had become, if not yet friends, at least close co-workers. He said he was pleased to have someone to talk to about his failing marriage. One day he asked me, "Helen, can I ask you something?" "Well, can you ask, Paul?" He grinned, appreciating my wit. "Why does George call you Bam?" "It's a nickname. It has to do with what we learned about each other when we first started dating." I laughed. "It's one of those things that only takes on full meaning when you've shared the same experience. Otherwise, everything is meaningless." Paul didn't push to find out. About a month later, the company held their big Independence Day party. I was looking forward to it being a 3-day weekend for all of us. Unfortunately, the night before, George called me from Dallas and told me he wouldn't be able to get home in time. I assured him that it was okay, that I would miss him, and that I loved him. The party coincided with the league championship game. Paul, of course, asked where George was, and I explained. He hardly said anything, just hummed. He had a very strange look on his face, half sad, but still tinged with a touch of some kind of anticipation. 2 weeks later, when George was on the road again, Paul called me into his office. This time he closed the door. He pointed to the couch and sat down next to me. "Helen," a pained expression flashed across his face, and he hesitated. "I'm sorry, but as a friend and colleague, I think you have a right to know. The night George missed the company party, which he unexpectedly didn't show up for, I'm afraid that—" He fell silent, and I could have sworn he suppressed a sob. "I'm afraid I have proof that George is having an affair." "That's impossible!" I almost screamed. "I know I can't believe it either, but—" He turned on the television in the corner of his office, then turned on the VCR. "But there's this. Please don't ask me how I got it. It was a movie. A man who looked like George, at least from the back, was making passionate love to a blonde woman with lush forms, each one to match mine, and more." I slowly pitched forward on the couch, listening and watching what was happening. The sound was pouring out of the TV. A blonde woman was screaming, "Yes, George, yes, take me like you always do." The man rolled onto his side and his face appeared on the screen. The image flickered and blurred for a moment, but it was George's face. Paul turned off the TV and put one arm around me. "I'm so sorry, Helen. I know it was awful. I can't believe it. I just can't believe someone could fall so low." "I know, Helen, and I couldn't believe it when my wife betrayed me. But it was true then, as true as it is now." I was very calm. "What are you suggesting, Paul? I don't believe in revenge, but someone who behaves like this should get what's coming to them." I could have sworn there was a look of anticipation in his eyes. "You're absolutely right, and I know how to arrange it." I listened to his proposal and agreed. So, 3 days later, I met him in a room at a well-known hotel. He'd already set up video equipment to record the two of us making love. "I don't want to do this to George," Paul said sadly, "but you have to teach him a lesson." "I agree." I smiled. "I'm glad you're here. Without you, none of this would have been possible." I took a deep breath as Paul turned on the video camera. He pointed it across the room at the king-sized bed with a champagne bucket next to it. He focused it on the foot of the bed. At his nod, I entered the frame at the same time as him. I put my arm around Paul's shoulders and smiled for the camera. "George, Paul has told me some very naughty things about you. He told me all about your cutie you have on the side. He was kind enough to explain what you do when you go out of town and told me about your bragging at the office. I tried not to believe it, but the last straw, my love, was the tape he showed me. Riding a blonde and bleached. I couldn't stand it. Trust. It's all about trust. George, you and I have talked about this enough for you to know what we base our relationship on. It's such a motto for us that it extends to our friends and coworkers. How someone can behave in such a way without the slightest concern for the effect it might have on the other person is beyond me." I turned to Paul and wrapped my arms around his neck. "Paul, could you say something to George before we start?" When Paul looked into the camera, his face broke into a shit-eating grin. "George, old boy, I'm sorry to do this to you, but it's for your own good. Maybe after this, Helen will be able to forget what you did to her." He continued to smile gloatingly as I ran my fingers through his hair. He moved closer to me, and I felt a bulge against my thigh. I stood on my tiptoes and whispered in his ear, loud enough for the camera microphone to pick up the words. "I want to share a secret with you, Paul. George's nickname for me. BAM is actually an acronym that stands for Big Ass Aggressive Marine." I stepped back slightly and kicked him in the balls. Paul suddenly turned pale and began to slowly bend in half, and I continued. "Sure, it's not politically correct, but it's a term used by male Marines to refer to female Marines. He's half joking, half true. I saw Paul fall to his knees, wrapping his arms around his dignity. My instructor was right, I said thoughtfully. Nothing gets attention like a good kick in the balls. I don't remember it being taught in my hand-to-hand combat course, but I felt it would do me a lot of good. With those words, I strung up one leg and kicked Paul in the ass. You stupid bastard! Did you really think I was stupid enough to fall for this? To accuse my husband just because of rumors and innuendo that I'm sure you started? I love him, you idiot. I spoke in a pompous tone, following him creeping toward the door, stopping only to make sure the camera was still looking at us. I knew you were up to something, ever since you pitched the idea. It may have worked before, but not with a couple that communicates on a daily basis. That same night, I found out about this hotel room. He was too tired to drive home after an 18-hour workday. You didn't think he'd call me from the room and tell me? And this so-called video. Oh my God, I'm a computer worm. That attempt to transplant George's face into whoever used that bimbo was laughable. It took me 2 seconds to notice. Paul managed to reach over and open the door. I bent over and grabbed his belt. I'm not done with you yet, rat. I can't believe your sass, making me think George was having an affair or even wanting to sleep with me. I guess it's all about the thrill of the conquest. Well, you picked the wrong girl and the wrong guy. Always faithful is not a motto I take lightly. I let go of his belt, put my foot on his ass, and pushed. He stretched out in the hallway, and I threw his keys after him. Speaking of trust, George trusted me to handle this case myself. Paul's eyes widened with shock. However, as soon as I call him, he'll probably start looking for you. He's an ex-Marine, too, if you haven't realized it by now, and I don't think you want to be in the same town with both of us holding a grudge against you. Why don't you move to Mukasransk, Egypt, before we find you? You have all the time you want, but I'd suggest leaving in 24 hours. I kicked Paul's ass one more time, but missed as he sped off down the hallway. 2 hours later, George and I were snuggled on the bed in the hotel room. The remains of the minibar were scattered on the floor. I rested my head on my husband's chest. God, the price is here! I looked up when George tilted his head back and popped the contents of a small bag of nuts into his mouth. Yes, it was very nice of Paul to put the number on his credit card. We'll have to thank him properly if we ever see him again. Speaking of seeing him again, I knelt on the bed, fiddling with the equipment we'd dragged to the edge of the mattress. Would you like to see him again? The bed squirmed as George knelt behind me. His hands began to roam my ass. If you want to, darling, but with my Bam's big ass looming in front of my eyes, I think I'll focus on you. What do you think? I lower myself onto my elbows and look over my shoulder. Again, sweetie? Well, always faithful, Marine. We never saw Paul again. By the time we got to the office 2 days later, he had already quit and left for an unknown destination. No one seemed saddened by his departure, especially when it turned out that I wasn't the only married woman he was hitting on. Apparently, he had a penchant for seducing happily married women, I suppose to get back at all of us for what his ex-wife had done. One thing I was very grateful to him for, though. 9 months and 3 days after our dedicated 48-hour celebration, I gave birth to a daughter. It was pure fun on our part to name her Helen Paula Thomas. She was our first, but not our last. We still embarrass everyone at any baseball game we all attend together. The end.